There's a stretch of road north of Kyiv where, in March 2022, you could find discarded green tubes lying in the mud beside the wrecks of Russian tanks. Each tube weighed about 12.5 kilograms. Each one was made largely of fiberglass and plastic. Each one was designed to be fired once and thrown away, like a disposable camera. And each one cost less than a family car. The machines they killed cost around $4.5 million apiece. The T-90M is Russia's most modern operational tank, wrapped in explosive reactive armor, fitted with countermeasures, advertised for years as close to invulnerable. The tube in the mud was an NLAW. One soldier, one shot. 5 seconds from spotting the target to firing, and 100-to-1 price difference between the weapon and the thing it destroyed. Here is the strange part. The country that engineered that weapon had not fought a war in more than 200 years. Sweden has been at peace since 1814. No trenches in the First World War. No occupation in the Second. No colonial wars, no interventions, no expeditionary campaigns. For 2 centuries, while the rest of Europe burned and rebuilt and burned again, Sweden watched from the sidelines. And yet, when Russian armored columns rolled towards Kyiv, the weapons that met them, the NLAW, the AT-4, the Carl Gustaf, carried Swedish engineering in their bones. Ukraine's infantry did not stop those columns with the products of battle-hardened military superpowers alone. They stopped them in significant part with the products of a nation that had spent 200 years refusing to fight. That is not a coincidence. It's the whole story. Because Sweden's neutrality was never pacifism. It was something far more interesting and far more dangerous to anyone who ever planned to invade the country next door. To understand why a neutral country builds world-class weapons, you have to understand what Swedish neutrality actually meant. It did not mean disarmament. It meant the opposite. A neutral state cannot count on allies. If Sweden were ever attacked, no NATO divisions would come, no American carriers, no British squadrons. Sweden would fight alone with whatever it had built for itself. So neutrality became a forcing function. Everything the Swedish military needed, Swedish industry had to be able to design and produce at home. Fighter jets, submarines, artillery, and above all, the weapons an outnumbered defender needs most, the ones that kill tanks. This is where the names come from. Bofors, the old ironworks at Karlskoga that became one of the most respected artillery houses in the world. Saab, founded in 1937 to build combat aircraft for a country that assumed it might one day face the Luftwaffe or the Red Air Force without help. The state factory at Eskilstuna, Carl Gustaf Stad's Gefärs factory, which gave its name to a weapon that is still in production today. During the Cold War, the assumption hardened into doctrine. Swedish planners looked east across the Baltic and prepared in detail for a Soviet invasion. Sweden was neutral on paper, but its entire defense establishment was built around one scenario: a massive armored force landing on or rolling towards Swedish territory and a smaller Swedish army of conscripts needing to bleed it white. Think about what that requirement does to weapons design. Your operators are not elite professionals with years of training. They are conscripts, ordinary young men doing their national service. Your doctrine is not armored counterattack. It is dispersed infantry fighting from forest, farmhouses, and coastal rock, ambushing a stronger enemy and disappearing. So your anti-tank weapons must be light enough for 1 or 2 soldiers to carry across rough ground, simple enough to use with minimal instruction, cheap enough to issue in enormous numbers, and lethal enough to destroy the best armor the Soviet Union could build. The Carl Gustaf, introduced into Swedish service in 1948 as the Granatgevär M48, was the first mature product of that philosophy. A shoulder-fired 84mm recoilless rifle with a rifled barrel that spins its projectiles for accuracy, reloadable, endlessly adaptable, firing everything from anti-armor rounds to smoke and illumination. It has now been in continuous production for over 75 years and serves in more than 40 countries. Weapons of its generation, the bazooka, the Payat, the Panzerschreck, are museum pieces. The Carl Gustaf is still on the front line. The AT-4 followed the same logic to its cheapest possible conclusion. Take the 84mm caliber, delete the expensive rifled steel tube, Use a disposable smoothbore fiberglass body instead, and give every infantryman his own single-shot tank killer. And the NLAW, developed by Saab Bofors Dynamics together with Britain's Thales and built in Belfast, added the final ingredient: guidance. 3 weapons, 1 design culture, all of it shaped by a single question Sweden asked itself for 70 years. How does the smaller force stop the bigger one's tanks? In February 2022, that question stopped being theoretical. It just wasn't Sweden that had to answer it. Modern warfare is often described in terms of technology, but underneath the technology sits arithmetic. And the arithmetic of Swedish anti-tank weapons is brutal. An NLAW costs somewhere in the region of $30,000 to $40,000, roughly £20,000 when Britain first bought them. A T-90M, by most estimates, cost about $4.5 million to build, before you count the trained crew inside it. Even against older Russian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, the ratio barely improves from Moscow's point of view. Every successful NLAW shot trades a disposable tube for a machine worth 50 to 100 times more. Compare that with the American Javelin, which has rightly earned its own reputation in Ukraine. A Javelin system with its command launch unit runs to well over $200,000, and the launch unit is a precious, reusable asset that units must protect. The NLAW is 6 to 8 times cheaper, and because the whole thing is thrown away after firing, there is nothing to recover, nothing to maintain, and nothing whose loss matters. You can hand them out like rifles. That is precisely what happened. The United Kingdom flew around 2,000 NLAWs into Ukraine in January 2022, weeks before the invasion, and total British deliveries eventually climbed past 10,000. Sweden, for its part, did something it had not done since the Soviet Union invaded Finland in 1939. On the 27th of February 2022, Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson stood up and broke a doctrine older than most of the world's governments, announcing that Sweden would send weapons into an active war. 5,000 Panzer Scott 86 launchers, the weapon the rest of the world calls the AT-4. A second batch of 5,000 followed within a month, and a third by the summer. Former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt put the logic in one sentence when the first launchers arrived, noting that if even 20% of those 5,000 weapons scored a hit, 1,000 Russian vehicles would be destroyed. Ukrainian officials went further. By March 2022, Kyiv was attributing roughly 30 to 40% of Russian tank losses in the opening phases of the war to the NLAW specifically. Treat that figure with appropriate caution. It comes from one side of the war and cannot be independently verified kill by kill. But the wreckage north of Kyiv, the abandoned columns around Bucha and Hostomel, and the sheer volume of launch tubes photographed at Ukrainian positions all tell a consistent story. Cheap Swedish-designed weapons in the hands of infantry with days of training imposed catastrophic losses on one of the largest armored forces ever assembled. And that inverts the entire economic theory of the tank. Russia's plan assumed that mass armor would shock a lightly equipped defender into collapse. Instead, every Russian tank became a rolling $4 million liability, hunted by weapons that cost less than its own ammunition load. The defender was not outspent. The defender was running a profit. None of that arithmetic works unless the cheap weapon actually kills the expensive one. So it is worth slowing down and looking at how the NLAW does it, because the mechanism is genuinely elegant, and once you understand it, half the tank wrecks in Ukraine suddenly make sense. Start with the shot itself. The NLAW is a soft launch weapon. The missile is ejected from the tube gently at about 40 meters per second, before its main motor ignites at a safe distance. That means almost no backblast, which means a soldier can fire it from inside a room, from a stairwell, from the window of a flat overlooking a road. For urban ambush warfare, that single feature is worth more than any armor statistic. Then comes the guidance, and here the NLAW takes an unusual path. It does not lock onto heat like a Javelin, and it trails no wire like older missiles. Instead, it uses what Saab calls predicted line of sight. The soldier tracks the moving tank through the sight for a few seconds, and the weapon's electronics measure exactly how the aim point is moving. When the trigger is pulled, the missile flies the predicted intercept path on its own. Nothing is emitted. There's no laser to detect, no seeker to jam, no warning for the crew. The first sign that an NLAW has been fired at you is the hit. And the hit is the clever part. In its overfly top attack mode, the missile is not aimed at the tank at all. It is aimed 1 meter above it. The missile skims over the turret roof, and in the fraction of a second it spends there, 2 independent sensors interrogate the space beneath it. A magnetic sensor feels the enormous mass of steel below. An optical sensor registers the sudden change in the distance profile as the turret rises up under the missile's flight path. Only when both sensors agree, steel below, silhouette below, does the fuse fire, and a downward angled shaped charge punches through the roof. Why the roof? Because armor is a budget, paid in weight. A tank designer can make the frontal arc survive almost anything, and on Russian tanks the front hull and turret cheeks are stacked with composite armor and explosive reactive blocks. But every ton spent on the front is taken from somewhere else, and the somewhere else is always the top. Turret roofs on Soviet-designed tanks are a few tens of millimeters thick, an order of magnitude weaker than the front. All the reactive armor, all the countermeasures, all the marketing faces forwards. The NLAW simply refuses to fight the strong side of the tank and attacks the side the designer sacrificed. On Russian tanks, that roof shot has a second horrific consequence. One regular viewers will remember from our video on the Challenger 3 and the T-90M. The T-72 family, which includes the T-90, stores its ammunition in a carousel autoloader directly beneath the turret. A penetration from above puts hot metal straight into that carousel. The propellant deflagrates, the stowed shells cook off, and the turret leaves the vehicle vertically. Analysts call it the jack-in-the-box effect. The crew does not survive it. 1 meter of clearance, 2 sensors in agreement, and a design flaw buried in the enemy's own architecture. That's the entire trick, and no Russian tank in service has a real answer to it. Zoom out from the single engagement and a pattern emerges across everything Sweden has sent or designed. The AT-4 is the philosophy at its most democratic. It is unguided, disposable, and simple enough that a soldier can be taught to use it in an afternoon, which mattered enormously in an army absorbing tens of thousands of volunteers and territorial defense troops. Its 84mm warhead will not reliably kill a modern tank through the frontal armor, but Ukraine's war is not fought head-on. It is fought against the flanks and roofs and engine decks of vehicles caught on roads and against the lighter armor, the BTRs. The Tiger infantry mobility vehicles, the supply trucks, that actually makes up most of a Russian column. There is even a confined space variant, using a countermass system in place of a conventional backblast designed so it can be fired from inside buildings and vehicles. Footage from the front has shown Ukrainian crews firing AT-4s from the hatches of moving vehicles mid-firefight, which is exactly the kind of improvised, close-quarter use the weapon was built to survive. The Carl Gustaf is the philosophy at its most patient. It is the veteran of the family, a weapon that entered service the year the Berlin airlift began and is still being manufactured in its 4th generation. Where the AT-4 gives every soldier one shot, the Carl Gustaf gives a 2-man team a reusable, precise, multi-purpose gun, and its heavier rounds have proven capable of destroying even modern Russian armor where they find the right angle. Its longevity is not nostalgia. It survives because the requirement it was built for, dispersed infantry versus mechanized mass, never went away. Ukraine is simply the largest demonstration of that requirement in 80 years. And the NLAW is the philosophy perfected, the conscript's simple ambush weapon, upgraded with just enough intelligence to guarantee the roof shot. Notice what none of these weapons are. None of them are prestige systems. None were built to win export competitions with flashy range figures or to look impressive at parades. Every design decision, the weight, the cost, the training burden, the firing signature, favors a defender fighting from cover against a stronger invader. Sweden spent 70 years designing weapons for a war it hoped to never fight, on a terrain it knew intimately, against an enemy it never named out loud. Ukraine inherited that entire intellectual project, ready-made, at the precise moment it needed it. There is a contrast buried in this story, and it's worth making explicit. Russia entered this war with the opposite philosophy: mass, weight, and shock. Thousands of tanks built around the assumption that armor concentration wins wars. Sweden's engineers, sitting quietly in Karlskoga and Linköping for decades, had bet the other way, that a smart, cheap, distributed defense beats concentrated mass. In the forests north of Kyiv, the two philosophies finally met. As we covered in our video on Sweden's bonus shell, the same country later proved the point again from a different direction, with smart artillery submunitions that hunt tank roofs from 35 kilometers away. Different weapon, identical idea. The top of a Russian tank is not armor, it's an address. Here is the final turn in the story, because the country that armed Ukraine's ambushes has itself changed beyond recognition. In March 2024, Sweden joined NATO, ending 2 centuries of formal non-alignment in a single signature. The doctrine that built Bofors and Saab, "we stand alone so we build our own," is gone. But the industrial machine it created is running faster than at any point since the Cold War. Saab has been expanding production across its ground combat portfolio towards hundreds of thousands of munitions a year, and Britain signed a £229 million contract to refill the NLAW stockpile as it emptied into Ukraine. And Sweden is now doing something it has not done at this scale since the 1990s. It is rebuilding its own armored fist. Under a roughly €1.8 billion program, the largest Swedish armor investment in decades, the entire fleet of Stridsvagn 122 tanks is being rebuilt to a new standard called the Stridsvagn 123A, with a new L55A1 gun, new sensors, new protection, and full NATO interoperability, while 44 brand new Leopard 2A8s join them as the Stridsvagn 123B, 154 modern tanks by 2031. The first upgraded Stridsvagn 123A was handed over in Munich in June 2026, and the rest are coming. Sit with the irony of that for a moment. The nation that spent the entire war teaching the world how cheaply tanks can be killed is spending nearly €2 billion on tanks. That is not a contradiction, it's a confession. Sweden's engineers understand better than anyone alive what a modern anti-tank weapon does to a poorly protected vehicle, because they built the weapons that proved it. So when Sweden buys tanks anyway, it is telling you something important about what it thinks tanks are still for, and what it thinks is coming to the Baltic. How Sweden intends to keep 154 tanks alive on a battlefield ruled by its own inventions. That is a story big enough for its own video, and it is the one we will tell next. For now, hold 2 images side by side. A factory in Eskilstuna that has been quietly perfecting the art of killing tanks since 1948, through 2 centuries of peace for a war its designers never saw. And a green fiberglass tube lying in the mud north of Kyiv, next to $4.5 million of burnt-out Russian steel. 200 years of silence, 5 seconds of flight, 1 meter above the turret. Peace, it turns out, was never the absence of preparation.